Hello, this is Steve with Pro Tools PC, and on this video I wanted to talk about creative uses of gates and signal generators on drums. I think of this as one of those odd tricks that can be used a million different ways or not at all depending on your workflow or needs. What we are doing here is using a kick to trigger a sine wave a la the 808 and using a snare to trigger white noise. These are fairly straightforward ways to show how to use this technique, but there are countless creative ways you could employ it. So I have pre-set up a session here to kind of look at. Everything is routed, some samples dropped in to give it more of a generic musical context. Using a sine wave with a kick could be called extremely normal, especially in the pop, hip-hop world. Lots of different styles of music, really. And while using a snare to trigger white noise is not as common, it's still pretty popular. I think it was most famously used by Trent Reznor on the song Closer. You can also hear it in a lot of dance, pop music, things like that. The key to making all of it work, though, is the routing, which is fortunately pretty simple. So I'm going to go into a session where we can build up the tracks and routing from the beginning. So I have a few tracks here created. I have an instrument track with BFD3 on it. So I am just using it for the drum sounds that we'll be triggering with. So I'm sending a kick drum out on the mono 1 output, and I'm sending the snare out the mono 2 input. Now you could also do this with any other VI that has individual outs, or you could use just audio samples, anything like that you'd like to do. So to accept the outputs of BFD3, we need to create a couple mono auxiliary tracks. And let's name one kick and the other snare. Let's move them over to the start here. So the first thing we need to do is to set the inputs to accept these outputs. So we'll go to plugin, and the kick was on mono 1 and the snare was coming out mono 2. So we are still going to be listening to these tracks. We'll still be using them. We'll be mixing them with the signal generator sounds. So we want the outputs here completely usable. There's two different ways we could do this. One is just to send it to your output chain, which in my case here is this master aux track. Or what I like to do for this situation is to create a auxiliary track for the kick side and an auxiliary track for the snare side, where each one is actually blending the raw drum sound with the signal generator sound. So to do that, we would set each side over here, the kick and the snare, to their own auxiliary output. In this case, I'm going to be sending them to a stereo aux track. Again, that is completely up to your workflow. And now we need to create a send on each track that will trigger a key input on the gate. In this case, a mono send is going to work just fine no matter the situation. So let's just use a couple mono bus sends. And let's turn up the volume. And now this track is ready to go. So next we need to create the tracks that will be the triggers. So in this case, you'll want to create two, again, mono or aux, that's completely up to you and your workflow. I will be creating two stereo auxiliary tracks. And let's name them. I'll name one Sine and the other White Noise. I'll move the sine wave here over by the kick. And let me set the colors the same on them. Now on these tracks, it'd be best just set the inputs to no input. And again, for the output, either you're going to send them out your output chain, or you will send them to the same place you are sending this kick track. So like I said, I like to create a single fader for them. So I will set the outputs the same. And here I would definitely recommend, if you're not going to be sending these two tracks to a common auxiliary, they're just going to the output, you should probably turn these tracks down, because when you turn the signal generator on, it could get kind of loud and ugly. And so now if you are using an aux track to combine these, let's go ahead and create two more auxiliary tracks. And once again, stereo or mono, depends on your workflow. I'll be using stereo. And let's name them. And let me move this one to place. Okay, and now we want to set the inputs and outputs. So the inputs, of course, will be accepting these outputs. And the outputs of this will be going into my final chain here. So now let's go back to the tracks that we will be placing the signal generator and gates on. In that case, it says the sine track and the white noise track. So let's come here to the sine. The first thing I would recommend is let's put the gate on first. So you would want to put that on at least the second insert point here. And in this case, I will be using the Avid Dyne 3 expander gate. You can use whatever gate you want, assuming it has a keyed input. And the first thing we want to do is set the key input here. So what the key input is it uses an outside source that you send into it to open and close the gate. So in this case, we want to use the kick track. We want to use this kick here to send to the gate. Oh, I missed something here. Also, what I would recommend is we need to set the sends to pre-fader. So no matter what volume movements we do here, it won't affect the keyed inputs into the signal generator. So let's send both of those to pre. And then now let's set this key input to match this send. So in this case, it's set on room verb left. And then we need to come over here by sidechain and turn it on. So here, this is kind of the most important part outside of the actual routing, is getting these settings correct. I like to set the range all the way down. The reason I do that is because when the gate is closed, I don't want any sound from the signal generator coming through. I like to turn the ratio all the way up. So on the attack, if it's too fast, it can actually cause like clicks and pops and stuff on a sine wave, which is rather annoying. With the sine wave, I usually like to start at, say, let's go up to about 350, 370 US. Somewhere right in there is usually a pretty good spot to start. Hold is how long the gate will stay open after the signal goes below the threshold before it starts to close. And release is how fast it will actually close after it starts to close. But for the sine wave, again, we don't want it to close too fast, but let's go ahead and set the hold to, let's do about 40 milliseconds, and the release somewhere around 180 or so sounds good. And on the threshold, it will dictate the dB level for when the gate opens and closes. If you're using samples, it's not really a big deal. It's really easy to set. If you're using like a live kit of some sort, it can be a little more difficult and require some automation. But I will set it, say, around -18 here, and we'll start here. So now we have all of the gate settings where we want them for the sine wave starting out. And I'll just go ahead and copy this over to the snare and make some tweaks. So obviously, first we want to change the key input. And the key input is set on the right side of that bus, which is right there. And we did set it to pre earlier. And then we want to change a little bit of the settings here. I definitely want to, because it's a snare has a really quick, fast attack. So I definitely want a faster attack on the snare. Then for the release, it's kind of the same way. I mean, the tone of a snare is usually in and out pretty quick. So I want a pretty quick hold and release on this track for the white noise. So let's drop, we'll go down here somewheres around 25, 26, 27 with the hold. And for the release, I'm going to bump that up. Let's say around here, 257, just a little bit. So now that we got the gate set up, let's go ahead and pull in the Avid signal generator. If you're using a stereo track, it is going to be under multi-mono. And I mentioned earlier that the sine wave on the kick would be around 60 hertz. And then again, I'll just copy that right over to the snare track and just click the white noise button, and it's good to go. So everything should be ready to start dialing in the gates and such. And then real quick, I would also recommend on the aux track for each set. So on the kick aux and the snare aux, let's solo safe. So you can solo between these individually and be able to hear them. They'll just pass through this track regardless. So to do that on PC, just hold down Control and click the S. On Mac, hold down the Apple key, click on the S. And then let's go ahead and we'll get the faders down to a reasonable level so it's not too loud when we first start out. And let's go ahead and just real quick try to dial these in. So I hope you found this video interesting and took something out of it. Feel free to contact us with questions or comments on our website. And thank you for watching.